In this part of the video, I'm going to be doing a brief overview of the different routing inside my API. The first call we're going to make is to the base URL of api.tidbury.xyz, which with the get function, so it will return just a 200 response code with a string explaining where the documentation is found and where the repository is. The next route we'll be trying is a search with my API for the search term of pizza. So if we send that, you see we get back a strict list of different JSON arrays of different recipes, and they each contain an ID, a title, time to cook, and another link to find out more exactly where we can find these recipes. If we then were to choose one, such as this one, the top one, the cauliflower crust pizza, we can then do an search here with the recipe and then the ID of the recipe to return a stripped down version which has the title, the steps to actually cook the pizza, which are formatted in HTML, the time, and another JSON array of the ingredients. And for these I've chosen to use the source ingredients, as I found that the Spoontacular API often return inaccurate results if we were to use their versions. So it says amount and then 1 tablespoon or half a dried tablespoon. These are all the functions that you can use without actually logging into my API, so these require no authorization. So if we go to add a user, we'll see we've got my name header as Jack Tidbury here, and we've got authorization basic auth with my email address and a password. So if we were to send that, we need to change that to post, and if we were to send that, we've got user added and a 200 response code. That means we're added to the database, but we're not yet verified. So if I was to try and search my favorites just like this, or search my profile like this, it would return incorrect password or unauthorized user. So what I'll need to do is go to my email, click on the email, click here to validate my account, and it says congratulations, your account is now validated. If I go back here, I can now do the same thing, but it will return Jack Tidbury, my email address, and the fact I'm now validated in the system. So next thing is a system where we can add favorites to my account. So if I was to add the favorite of the cauliflower pizza we looked at earlier, I'd send that with a basic auth header, and I'd get I was going to spell it right. I'd get recipe added to favorites here and a 200 response code. That's great. We can also delete it by using the delete function. Same thing. We can also delete it like that, and it will say recipe removed from favorites with a 200 response code. And if we were to try and get my favorites here, it will return empty array because there's nothing actually in my favorites array as we've removed the one thing we put in there. So if I go back and add this, and then let's also add another one like this, you see it's added that one to favorites as well. If I was to now request my favorites from here, it makes multiple asynchronous calls to my own API and returns one response which actually contains multiple responses. And the benefits of doing this is that it's always getting the most up-to-date information from the third-party API that I'm making use of. So the only thing that's actually stored in the database is the ID. It's stored in an array in the Mongoose database, and then when this function is called, it builds URLs from the array and makes an asynchronous call for each URL. I'll get onto that later when we look at the code. So as you can see here, you've got the two recipes in my favorites, and the last thing I can do is delete my profile. So if we just go delete here, send, user's been successfully removed. So now if I was to try to validate myself again, it will say no user found. So we can add my user, added it back, and if we try and add another one with the same email, it does come with an error, user already exists with this email. For data persistence within my API, I chose to make use of a MongoDB database using the mongoose functions within the node package. As you see here in my database.js, we define a new model called user, which takes the strings of name, email, a password hash, validation code, and the array of favorites. This is then generated in the register user function. The password is hashed before storage for security. A unique code is generated for validation. The email is sent out here using the node mailer package, sent to the user's email address from my personal email address, which is api@tidbury.xyz, with the code to validate their account. It then adds it all to the database, and as you see here on a database, this is an example of a normal user within the system with the name, the email, their hashed password, the validation, in this case I have validated this account, the validation code that was used, and the array of their favorites. Here we can see my JS documentation for my API. It's hosted on docs.api.tidbury.xyz. The front page is just a list of the different endpoints within my API. Then you have the modules over here on the right hand side, and they've got full JS documentation for every function that's written within my API. One piece of my code that I did want to talk about is the async functions that I have inside my users.js file for retrieving the user's favorites. As I mentioned earlier, the only information stored in the database is the ID of the recipe they've added. So when they request the favorites, they need to be authorized first, so that's handled in the authorization. It then finds them in the database using their email as provided in the header. It then gets their requests, so it gets their favorites ID, so that's all of their IDs that they've added to their favorites array. It then builds an array of requests. So in this case, it's api.tidbury.xyz/recipe/the ID that they want to get, and this is done for every single item in their favorites array. It then uses the async npm module with the requests array, and it builds one large response. So when all of them are done, when all of the requests that have been sent have been handled, and each of the bodies has been passed to the JSON.parseBody, it does a callback with the body, and then when they're all done, it sends a code of 200 with the results array, which is built using the bodies of the other responses. So for the end user, they make one request and it handles multiple requests internally and returns with one response. For running the linter on my files to ensure code standards, I'm using a IDE called Atom, which has a plugin for ESLint. I've specified my ESLint RC files as provided, and it automatically scans my file and notifies me if there's any errors, so I can show you that as now. If I was to declare an empty function, it says unexpected token, or if I was to leave white spaces at the end of a line, it brings them up to my attention straight away, so I know to fix them. So you can see in the bottom corner there are no issues in this file, and there's no issues in any of my files, authorization, users, get data, or database. So my code lives up to the ESLint rules. For testing within my application, I have three main suites of tests, as you can see here, each one with multiple tests inside it, testing the main features of my API. I can now run these tests and they'll all pass with the command npm test. It runs my node jasmine.js file. As you see here, it's running my tests, and it says none of them have failed.